Welcome to the 8th episode of the Exotic Tier List. In this episode, we are reviewing Merciless, which is an exotic solar fusion rifle. Here's the current state of the Exotic Tier List. In the last episode, we added Hard Light to the C category for being a bit bland, so we'll see where Merciless fits in. Merciless is the first fusion rifle that we are reviewing in the series. It is one of only 9 exotic fusion rifles in Destiny 2, and 4 of those are actually solar as well, so it does have a bit of competition here. The other 3 of course being Jotunn, Vex Mythic Last, and 1000 Voices. I only have one of those. Merciless's most interesting attribute is the intrinsic trait Conserve Momentum, which says hits with projectiles decrease this weapon's charge time for a short duration. It also does note that Merciless is an unstoppable weapon, which was actually added in the most recent Monument of Triumph update where all exotic weapons now have some sort of champion perk. Merciless's second trait is called Impetus, which states that reloading immediately after a kill increases weapon damage for a short time. Merciless does have a catalyst, which increases the range and the stability of the weapon. However, it also got updated with Monument of Triumph to also now have Heal Clip, which says reloading shortly after dealing a final blow grants cure to you and your nearby allies. I had a very strange time using Merciless. For the longest time, I felt as though I didn't understand how to use the weapon effectively, and it didn't leave a very good impression on me. But near the end, it just suddenly clicked and I realized where I was going wrong. I feel that there's a bit of a conflict with the traits that this weapon has. Conserve Momentum seems to focus on just projectiles hitting, which to me speaks to boss damage or just trying to do as much damage to a single enemy as possible. But Impetus focuses on doing a final blow, reloading, getting more damage, and Heal Clip also focuses on that sort of thing where you have to get a final blow, reload, you're cured. So there's 2 different ideologies going on there, because if you're doing boss damage you're not getting final blows. So to begin with, I was using this as though it was a normal fusion rifle, and I was using it on orange bar enemies, major enemies, and it just didn't feel right. It was almost as though it was too good at killing them. I was defeating major enemies too quick, which was a very strange issue to have. But it was burning through ammo if I had held down the trigger, and it didn't feel very good. Like, it's a special weapon. I should have a good amount of ammo. It shouldn't just burn through it like a heavy weapon would. My perspective changed near the end, because I realised that it felt much more effective using it for just that boss damage, and Impetus started reading to me as though it was essentially a trench barrel for fusion rifles, where with trench barrel you melee an enemy, you get 3 shots, which are more powerful than they usually would be. I originally had a section in the video where I said Impetus didn't work properly, and I even uploaded the video, got to the point where I was ready to set it live, and then tested it again and figured out that Impetus doesn't actually show up as being activated on your screen, and it also only does the increased damage if you use it on an enemy that can actually take multiple shots. Otherwise it just caps out at the health of the enemy, which I suppose makes sense. So you can see here the damage I do to this phalanx is about 284, 283, but if I reload and shoot this one, it does 424 or 427. But you'll notice that I don't actually have Impetus come up as a perk option. So again, it should now be activated because I reloaded. You can see Cure did come up, but Impetus didn't. So Impetus is there, Impetus does work, but there's no way of telling that it's actually activated. I have to say though, given that I think Merciless is more of a boss damage weapon, Heal Clip doesn't really seem like it helps too much. Moving on to the testing section, I decided to compare Merciless with 2 other fusion rifles. The first being Jotunn, which is of course another exotic solar fusion rifle, and then the second being Cartesian Coordinate, which was just a legendary solar fusion rifle which I happen to have, which is somewhat modern. These comparisons will be a bit strange though, because as we've already discussed, Merciless seems to be more of a boss damage weapon, whereas other fusion rifles tend to be more major enemy weapons, so the values are going to be rather different for damage at least. We've also got an extra row for Merciless, and that's what I've calculated would be the damage values with Impetus active. So it's a bit of an approximation, but it should be somewhat accurate. So the first column is just body damage. Merciless does 815 damage, with Impetus active it should do 1222. Jotunn does 732 including burn damage, and then Cartesian Coordinate does 531, but with controlled burst active it'll do 639. So you can already see right here there's a big difference in damage values between Merciless with its buff active and then the other 2 fusion rifles. Jotunn and Merciless I guess are quite close whenever there's no buff active, but this becomes a much larger gap with DPS. Charge time I've just taken from the actual stats on the weapon in Destiny 2. I didn't test this, however these feel somewhat like how it feels to use the weapon. Merciless's charge time, of course, only affected whenever you haven't got any of those momentum charges built up, so as you hit more shots, it'll get faster to charge up. So this is literally only for the very first charge. But Jotunn 833 and in Cartesian coordinates 516, and you can certainly feel a Cartesian coordinate is way faster than the exotic fusion rifles in this case. Magazine size 8 for Merciless, 5 for Jotunn and 7 for Cartesian coordinate. I think Merciless needs that magazine size because of how fast it burns through the ammo when it has the momentum going, but it certainly wouldn't go amiss having a bit more. Then for the DPS, Merciless does 1252, and this is with it getting the momentum over time and the damage is increasing. I've had to calculate the impetus value here. This was a bit of a strange calculation because of the way impetus works. According to light.gg, it gives you 4.5 seconds of 1.5 times damage immediately after you reload after getting a kill. And because it takes 4.8 seconds roughly to go through a Merciless's entire mag, I calculated the DPS as 7 shots with the buff active, then the final shot not having the buff, and that came to 1801 DPS approximately. Jotunn 483, Cartesian coordinate 692. I think this highlights especially how Merciless is more of a boss damage weapon as opposed to just a random major enemy weapon, because the DPS is so much higher. It could be way higher with impetus active, but even just without that going, it still is substantially higher than either of the other two fusion rifles. Jotunn has the slowest reload, whereas Merciless is second and Cartesian coordinate is the quickest. For single shot, I measure from clicking the reload button until the magazine gets replenished, and for the magazine, I calculate from whenever you shoot that final shot to then the magazine gets replenished, which is why it's longer. So the actual reload speed I don't believe is longer in isolation. It's just the time it takes for you to shoot that final shot and then the reloading kicking in seems to be longer for the likes of Merciless than it is for Jotunn or Cartesian coordinate. Range is the same for Merciless and Cartesian coordinate. Jotunn has a basically infinite range because it shoots a projectile, so it just doesn't matter how far it goes, it just does the same damage as far as I can tell. And then ADS speed, it's basically the same for all of them, and with the fusion rifle you don't really have to aim down sight, but Merciless takes the longest, Cartesian coordinates the quickest. I think that testing really does show that Merciless is rather unique in the scheme of fusion rifles. It is more orientated towards boss damage, as I've said, whereas typical fusion rifles are just more for major enemies or maybe like low health yellow bar enemies. So it is rather fascinating to see just how big of a difference there is between the DPS values, especially for Merciless. The actual damage it outputs on a per shot basis isn't that different, but the DPS is because it shoots so much faster whenever you get up to those 15 shots of momentum. So it is rather interesting in that case. There is one weak quirk with Merciless which I haven't mentioned up to this point, and it is that as you build up the stacks of momentum, the damage per individual shot in a volley lowers from 151 damage to 148, which is very strange. It's minimal, so there's 5 shots in a volley, therefore it's 15 damage per actual volley that you're losing, but the charge time is so much faster as you build up those stacks, you really don't notice it. But it's a bit strange. I do wonder if this is maybe a holdover from how the weapon used to work when the game came out, and it's just a remnant of that, but it's not mentioned anywhere, so I just thought it was a weird quirk. I have had quite the internal debate about where to put Merciless in the tier list. I had considered C to begin with because I was a bit frustrated that it wasn't functioning the way I expected a fusion rifle to function, but once I then grasped the fact that it was more of a boss damage oriented weapon, I was going to put it into the B category. I then figured out how impetus works and figured out that it works correctly, so because of this, I'm actually going to put it into the A category, which surprises me because I uploaded this video, had it put into the B category, and I'm now changing my mind because it actually works how it should. So there we go. But Merciless will join Graviton Lance and Fighting Lion as the third A category weapon, and Borealis will remain lonely for another episode. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know where you would put Merciless in your tier list, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.